Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is April 25, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Marty Krystall. Where in the heck you calling in from, Marty?
Los Angeles, California, man.
I can dig it. I'm in Venice. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Uh, I don't know if I'm qualified to answer.
Well, Marty, all these questions is more I'm after like your hunch or your guess.
I don't know. I'm an unusual specimen because I'm just obsessed with sound,
Yeah.
and back pressure and woodwinds, reeds. It's kind of like it's either a mental illness or an obsession or pure art, but it's just something that is addictive.
Yeah.
And luckily, I'm I've been able to make a living at it, which is like a miracle. I've been blessed,
Well,
very
Su-
lucky.
Susan Sontag said artists are obsessive. And when you said pure art, I've heard your music and it is pure art. What is your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
I don't know. It's it takes a long time. It takes years. I'm learning stuff now that I started out when I was, I don't know, 15 to try to figure out, and I'm 72 now, so I'm starting to learn stuff that's easy. But the irony of it all is that when I finally am able to do something easily and relax, then I'm not required to do that anymore.
Right.
So, as an example, uh, you know, I was I broke into the studios in LA. I mean, that is, I had my first studio gig in 1972, and one of the reasons I got the gig was because I was in a rock and roll band, and I was playing tenor and flute and clarinet, and I had all my instruments electrified. Like
Yeah.
Eddie Harris, you drill your horn or your barrel or in the clarinet or your neck in the saxophone and put a pickup on there. And then I was in a rock band, so I had to compete with the guitar player.
Right.
The guitar is the natural predator of the saxophone.
Yeah.
So to protect myself, I had to I got a Bandmaster amp, a twin reverb amp with Fender with a Bandmaster cabinet, two speakers. And I must have started losing my hearing right then. But I was in that band for a year when I was like 18. But I had all my electronics together. I had an Echoplex, and I was studying at the time clarinet with a studio musician, John Neufeld, and he was working in the studios playing woodwinds with electronics, and I got a lot of tips from him on what to get, and I got a ring modulator and stuff. Anyway, I met Buell a couple of years after that, 1970, and anyway, that's another long story. But he it was a friend of Freddie Myro's who came out here from New York. He was a legit composer, and he ended up at MGM as the head of the music department. They moved Isaac Hayes out and they moved Freddie in right after Shaft. And Freddie asked Bill, any woodwind players who can, I need a legit clarinet player who can play Mozart for a source cue. And I need somebody that can play bossa nova jazz on the flute and the alto and can play funky tenor and play with electronics. And there
Yeah.
weren't too many guys that could do all of that. So I got the call. First, they auditioned me, and I brought all that stuff upstairs to MGM there in Freddie's office, and I hooked all my stuff up together and played for him, and he liked it. So I got the call. So that was my first studio, and it was also Buell's first studio call for a movie. Up until
Wow.
then, he'd done 2,000 record dates in New York and jingles and everything else. And what was the point of this? Oh yeah, so that was just luck, you know.
Yeah.
But it happened to be my interest that I was in, playing rock and roll. And, you know,
Yeah.
it took me 2 years to figure out how to play R&B. It's not something you can really learn unless you play it, you
Yeah.
know. So again, I was very lucky. I dropped out of college. I got a gig at the Sold Out on Sunset Boulevard, which was an R&B club, a Pimp's Hangout, and we were the trumpet player got me on it. We were the two white boys in the club. No other. It was an all black club, except for us. And I lasted a year there, but it wasn't a very good band. But it was part of my learning experience. I had jam sessions every day, and I just kind of taught myself how to play. And I learned more at Hazel and Herb's soul food restaurant, where Calvin Keys was a guitar player, and he was a real tight with George Benson. They kind of grew up together, and he
Yeah.
had the same kind of style. And I learned so much from that guy. By the time that was also a gig lasted a year, but I didn't get paid. I just got breakfast. So I've spent 18 hours a day playing for about 18 months. With
Yeah.
jam sessions, the R&B gig, and then from 3 till 6 a.m. the after hours gig.
Yeah.
And after a year and a half of that, I'm ready to. I had my own sound,
Yeah.
and that's unusual because, I mean, back in the 70s, everybody had their own sound. There wasn't
Yeah.
anybody of any instrument that played any instrument that you couldn't tell who it was if he was a saxophone player
Yeah.
or a clarinet player, a flute player. All you had to hear is a few notes and you could recognize who it was. But now you can't recognize anybody. Everybody sounds the same to me. I mean,
That's amazing. Marty, hold on, because I understand we'll probably have to drop all the philosophical questions and go delve deep into music right off the bat, because I've had
that's all I know.
I have had people like you. This is amazing. But it's funny because the first thing you said was, I'm still learning. And it reminded me of what Sonny Rollins, I read somewhere recently, when he's done playing the gig, he goes into the dressing room and he keeps playing. And the guys in his band goes, dude, we're done. And he says, I'm still trying to work things out.
Yeah, I met Sonny.
I bet.
That was a really freaky scene when I met Sonny.
Yeah.
My wife and I've been married since 1976
Yeah.
to Trinidad, the Indian princess.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was 1987, and I had a day off, and she had a day off, and I said, "Well, let's go to the marina." We were living in Mar Vista, renting a house, and anyway, we went to Vaughn's in the marina. It was close by. That was the closest store, and we're around shopping, and I see this huge guy with a floppy hat, and he's walking like Frankenstein.
Yeah.
He's lurching,
Yeah.
and he's like left, right, and his whole body's swaying left, right, and he's
Yeah.
stiff-legged, and his arms are out straight ahead, like. And all these housewives with their shopping carts are eyeing him and steering clear. So everybody moves out of his way, and I can't believe what I'm watching. And I said, Trini, that looks. I point and I said, that looks like Sonny Rollins. And she slaps my hand down. She goes, don't point. You're embarrassing me. I said, that's Sonny Rollins. She goes, go ask him. So I'm walking alongside him, and I say, Sonny? And he stops, and he turns around and goes, it's you, Sonny Rollins. I say, I'm a big fan of yours. My name's Marty Krystall. And we shake hands. He goes, Marty Krystall, the tenor player?
Oh my God, that is heavy.
Wait a minute. What? Uh-oh.
No, you're still there.
Wait, now I'm getting I got to shut my phone off. Hang on.
Oh, that's smart. Shut your phone off is a smart move. So
Hold on.
then he
Yeah, so
recognizes you in your shot.
yeah,
Oh no.
he recognized me because now I can't hear you. Shit.
Okay, I'm still talking. Can you hear me now?
Okay, now I can hear you. So
Good.
we were both playing the Ravenna Festival in Italy. I was with Buell's band, Thelonious, and
Yeah.
he saw my name on the poster,
Yeah.
and he was there, and that's how he knew me. But then we talked for about an hour in front of the meat section, and we
Oh
introduced our
my God.
wives, and
You
he
talked
invited
for
me to the show.
1 hour at Vaughn's, and then did you go to the show?
Yeah, which was a 4 hour show. And Sonny only stopped for about 30 seconds, a couple of minutes. He
Yeah.
played for 4 hours straight.
Yeah.
And he only stopped for maybe 5 minutes. He gave the piano solo, gave the piano player a chorus or two. He gave
Yeah.
what the trombone, Clifton, his cousin, the trombone
Yeah.
player, he gave him about 3 or 4 choruses of maybe 1 or 2 tunes. Other
Yeah.
than that, it was all Sonny, and it was a mind blower, man.
Yeah. Well, Marty, what you touched on in that long background rap, which I really loved, your detail and your storytelling technique is articulate and fun. So I appreciate this. But Ben Ratliff, he just wrote a book about Bill Frisell. It's like a couple inches thick. And he says something you touched on. He says, I mean, sound as it is long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So that's what you just said. You said, hey, we in the old days, we could hear Sonny and go, oh, that's Sonny. Oh, that's Miles. So what Ben did was he applied 2 words, say 2 or 3 words, like Miles, fragile and pointed, Coltrane, slightly undercooked and urgent, Coleman Hawkins, ripe and mellow. If a music writer that you really respected was going to say the Marty Krystall sound in a couple words, what 2 words would you feel they got it? They get me.
I'd say hot and sweet.
There you go. Hot and sweet, man. You did
But
that fast. Yeah, go ahead.
but I was a friend of Pharaoh Sanders for about his last 10 years. We were
Yeah.
neighbors. He
Yeah.
lived near me in Mid City here. And we would hang out a lot every week. And I'd say, you don't growl and scream through your horn. That was my favorite period was when you were playing in 1960, 68 with Coltrane. Then
Yeah.
right after that, 1970, you played with Randy Weston, and
Yep.
your sound, and we were both really into mouthpieces and saxophone and reeds and the whole bit. We'd talk for hours. Anyway, and he said, well, he goes, no, I don't do that anymore. Like, I said, oh. So, in other words, Coltrane and Miles is different, but Coltrane didn't live long enough. A lot of these great jazz artists that you had their own sound, they didn't live past their 40s much.
Yeah.
But Pharaoh lasted till his 80s,
Yeah.
early 80s. So
Yeah.
he was able to develop his sound and completely change, I mean, he always had the basic sound, but it got a lot more mellow.
Yeah.
And the music he played was a lot more gentle. It wasn't as aggressive and violent, which I
Yeah.
kind of missed. I like aggression and violence. And I
Yeah.
think like anger is an important part of music.
Well, here you brought up two questions. First one is anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Well, when it's contained.
When it's contained. Okay, and the other question you really evoked was tell me one major element of your sound that has changed and one major element that stayed the same in the what? Would you say 60 years you've been doing this? Over 50 years.
Yeah, I've been doing it for about over 50. Yeah.
Okay, in over 50 years, what's one major element that stayed the same for you in your sound, and what's one major element that's changed?
Okay. When I was about 16, or let's see, I was in a folk band with a bass player and a guitar player, and he sang, and he was trying to get a record deal, and we had rehearsals, and I don't think we had any gigs, but we made a demo, and that was like 1966 or 7, and I was still in high school, and we went to RCA, and we recorded there, and Wally got a mental block. Danny. Anyway, the engineer is Danny Wallen. Thank you.
Okay.
Got it. Danny Wallen was the engineer, and he was a big time movie mixer. Great engineer, one of the greatest. Yeah. And that's the first time I heard myself play back in a studio setting, and I was just thrilled. I mean, I heard this sound. It was completely liquid. It sounded like my favorite clarinet players. I was playing clarinet in this group.
Yeah.
So, I think it must have been 66. And I heard it back with reverb, and I said, wow. I said, I really sound great. And that said, I'm going to keep sounding like this. I mean, who sounds better than this? I'm sounding just like my favorite clarinet players, So I still sound like that. And I know how to, so sometimes it takes me 2 hours to get there. Like this morning, I laid out my mouthpieces, my reeds. I have to go through the reeds. Sometimes they play it, sometimes they don't. The weather changes. Sometimes the reeds don't play at all. I have to switch mouthpieces. Then I get my sound, and then there it is. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm me again. Until that happens, I'm nothing. I'm just a schmuck, that can make breakfast maybe. I can do chores. I can wash the dishes. I can clean, but I can't create like a fantastic tone and communicate.
Yeah. Okay, that's what you've said is that's the element that stayed the same. In the 50 years, what has changed?
I don't know, not much. I can hear a little better, so the thing is, what's really another irony of my life is that, until I was about 50, I had to practice and practice because I was never really sure I was going to be able to play everything I need to play at work. When you do a studio call, you never know what you're going to play or even what instruments you're going to play till the night before a lot, if you're a woodwind player.
Yeah.
So they'd say a bass clarinet, contrabass clarinet, or they'd say clarinet, E flat clarinet, the little one. And they say flutes, even oboe, English horn, you never know. So I was always practicing, and on the clarinet, I was always practicing because one time I was doing a session for Artie Kane, who was one of my leaders. He did those TV shows in the 80s, mid 80s, Love Boat, Hotel, Dynasty, Knots Landing. They
Yeah.
were all dramatic shows that had, dramatic clarinet solos. He liked the clarinet. So he'd write me
Yeah.
a lot of solos. One time he wrote me up at a high C sharp, a pi, and nobody else came. It was just clarinet alone. And I started to play and nothing came out. So I blew harder, put more air in it. And then the tone came out of nothing. We call it niente in the orchestra, when a tone comes out of nothing from the distance and then gradually forms into a note. And then I held that note and then finished the solo. And then he goes, we need another one. Can you do it like that again?
And did you do it?
Yeah.
Wow.
I said, okay, I can do that. So, but I was always a little nervous,
Yeah.
I always had my reads. I was always practicing all the time when I wasn't working, because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to play maybe something. I was
Well, that's
always sight reading stuff. I could read anything you put in front of me. I could transpose it. So finally, when I got to be about 50, I didn't have to practice that much anymore. I knew I could do it all.
Yeah.
But it took me, 40 years to get there, And of
Right.
course, that's when I started losing my work. That's when I was 50. They were looking for new younger guys,
Right. But let's go back to that, Marty, for a second, when you said what changed and you said, I can hear better. Is that how does that involve listening? Because I'm curious, great musicians will always say half the act of playing music is listening, especially with other people, And so when you say I can hear better, do you mean you can hear yourself better, or your actual hearing has sharpened? Like, what does that mean? I can hear better in
Well,
what?
I recognize pitches better.
Yeah, that's it.
I don't have perfect pitch. So
Yeah.
I was at people that have perfect pitch, they can hear every note and they know what it is.
Yeah.
So it's easy for them. For me, it's not.
Yeah.
I have relative pitch. So if I'm playing in a key and I hear a note, I know pretty much what the note is, but it's a little different. So when I'm playing a song, or I'm playing a piece, or I'm playing in a jazz group, I memorize the music and the chords and the changes and the background melodies and the harmonies, but I'm practicing by myself. And then when I get with the band, then I get to play, and I get to play with the band and hear it all. But it was always a problem for me. I'd always have to work really hard to make sure I didn't get lost and I knew where I was in the tune. And sometimes I didn't hear I'd be getting carried away in my own playing. I wouldn't hear the background. I wouldn't hear the other guys. I'd be off by a half a beat or whatever, then I'd catch up, or, it was never easy for me. And it's easier now, a lot easier.
That's what's changed. It's like Gary Player, the golfer, says, the more you practice, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
But let's talk about these words you just said. Work really hard. Where'd you get your work ethic from?
Oh, I guess I don't know. I mean, my father had a store in Westwood Village, and his father came over from either Poland, Russia, or Germany on the Rhine River at around about 1895 or so. He was 13, and he joined his uncle in the Mojave Desert. He went to Ellis Island, but then his uncle had a store in the Mojave Desert, in the town of Mojave.
Yeah.
And he worked in the store when he was 13, and he learned English and Spanish.
Yeah.
Because there are Mexicans in the mining in Mojave, big Mexican community. So anyway, he was working forever, 13, and then he opened a store later. And my father was also, working from a very young age. He when he was a teenager, he worked at Warner Brothers as a messenger boy, and then he went into the Army and became an artillery captain. This is right before Pearl Harbor. He went in 1940,
Yeah.
but he knew all the actors and everybody at Warner Brothers in 1937. He started when he was 16. Before that, he was in the, when he was 14, he went into the military. What do they call that? You could, for the summer, you could go camping at the Army
Yeah.
base, and they'd hook you
Yeah.
up with a horse. You have your own horse and learn how to ride and take care of the horse like the cavalry.
Yeah.
He was born in 1918, my dad. So anyway,
Yeah.
he had this work ethic. So when I was like 9 or 10, he said, you need to get a job. You're not making enough allowance.
Yeah.
He says, why don't you get a paper route?
Yeah.
Before that, I was a cashier at the school.
Yeah.
I learned how to make change and like that. So anyway, I had a paper out, and but when I was 12, I was just starting to play the clarinet. I started at like 11, but when I was 12, this guy came to the door and asked my dad if I could help him load the timpani and percussion into the orchestra pit in the Santa Monica Opera at the
Yeah.
Civic Center. And he needed a helper.
Yeah.
And he heard that I was a talented musician, even though I'd only been playing for a year in elementary school.
Yeah.
I don't know. He found out from my clarinet teacher or something. He was a black scientist. He worked as a computer scientist on Olympic Boulevard at TRW, one of those,
Yeah.
something RW. And he was a real geek. He had short sleeve white shirt with a skinny tie, pocket protector full of
Yep.
automatic pencils,
Yep.
and and he said he said, I'll teach you to play cymbals and triangle.
Wow.
Piatti is the crash cymbals. I need someone to play those, and I'll pay you the pay is $7.50 a week for 2 rehearsals and a concert, and it's every week. And my dad let me go. So there I was off at 12 years old, schlepping percussion and learning how to count 380 measures. And that's pretty much the only reason I became a musician. It's one of the main reasons was that,
Yeah.
I'm listening to opera. My dad was an opera fan, and he was an amateur musician. But it's kind of thrilling to be 12 years old and being in an orchestra pit, being right there
I
and
bet.
seeing rehearsal and counting measures and figuring out how to come in at the right tempo. You have to memorize the tempo that's going to happen. And these are professional tricks that college kids don't even know that. When they go to college and study music, they didn't learn as much as I learned just hanging out in the orchestra pit,
That's
counting
pretty
measures.
intense. Marty, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Don't worry.
That's good. Now let's do the deep delve right now. What's the function of music?
To relax people.
Nice. A screenwriting teacher told me that great art, great music is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're composing a Marty Krystall piece of music, what role does intention play in your creative process?
Well, I just try to let whatever comes into my mind appear instead of not letting it appear. So I get like messages from somewhere.
Yeah.
To me, music is like messages. It's like a language. So to compose music, you have to be in the right frame of mind to receive the message.
Yeah.
and then it'll just, then you write it down, and then you try to make more sense of it afterwards. So I make, I receive the melody, and I write the melody down, and then I figure out what to do with it, how to support it with harmony or counterpoint,
Yeah.
like that. And the same thing when I'm improvising. Improvising is like that all the time.
Yeah.
So, but I learned my basic form of improvising is playing in black clubs, which no longer exist.
Yeah.
So when young people that are listening to me, they say, "What's a black club?"
Yeah.
Well, a black club is like in Inglewood in LA here, or South Central,
Yeah.
where black people live and no white people live there. And at
Yeah.
night, it's a black audience, and there's a lot of women.
Yeah.
And you're playing a sax solo, and the purpose of the sax solo is to get the audience excited. That's why
Yeah.
the saxophone was invented. It wasn't to, play in an orchestra, play music of Berlioz or Prokofiev. It was meant to make people shout and yell, get excited and dance.
Yeah.
So I learned that when I played a sax solo, it has to build, and it has to get more and more exciting, and then it has to hit a high point, and at that high point, people start screaming.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then, well, you blew it.
Literally. But Marty, you anticipated the next question again, like so many. You've got ESP. Marcel Duchamp that says there's no art without an audience. When you're composing a Marty Krystall composition, how much does the audience, the listener, play in your creative process? How much does thinking about the potential listeners play in your composing exercise? How much are you thinking of your audience when you're writing?
Always. I'm only thinking about the audience.
Yeah.
It's like Cecil Taylor, Buell Neidlinger told me that, Cecil Taylor was successful because he didn't have much work. He didn't get to play for an audience much. But every time they rehearsed and every time he practiced, he was always doing that for the audience. That was his big focus.
Wait, I didn't get what that is. He was always doing, what's that? Cecil was,
whether he was practicing on the piano by himself, whatever he was doing, it was for the audience. He was always performing for an audience, whether he was practicing, rehearsing, learning his material with the band. They didn't have much work.
you mean he would imagine the audience even if they weren't there.
Exactly.
Okay, so this is you hit on two of my major questions immensely. Ruth Draper says the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. That sounds good, but how do you do that?
Well, that has to do with suffering.
How's that?
Well, the audience is suffering. Basically, they're suffering. That's why they're there. They need the music. Especially most of the audiences that I've played for, I'm not. In other words, people don't really get to express themselves because they're not musicians and artists. There's something else. They're civilians. What I call civilians.
Yeah, I got you.
So, they go do their job that they're not crazy about, or maybe they are, maybe they hate it, whatever. They have their own personal problems. They have financial hardship. Of course, when I was playing in the 70s, people had money to go out. It's not like now. Now
Yeah.
you have to spend $200 to go hear music, or,
Yeah.
or at least 75 each. When I was working in the 70s and the 80s, it
Yeah.
cost like $3 or $4 to go to lighthouse or to any,
Yeah.
you know. So I was playing for poor people.
Yeah.
You know, occasionally people, when they had money, they bought clothes and they buy
Yeah.
cars, but they didn't buy houses.
Yeah.
You know, so they were poor. All their money went to clothes. You know, they looked great and they drove a great car, but they were broke. Now, rich people, they don't dress well. You know, they wear T-shirts and jeans and Birkenstocks or something, or whatever, sandals,
But
or
yeah, Marty,
but
what you're saying
they
though,
own
yeah,
$1 million houses.
yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. You're really articulate, and I appreciate you really get what I'm after. And this thing you said, the audience is suffering, is that almost metaphorically saying that the human condition is suffering, whether you have money or not? They're seeking some sort of somethingness by going to hear live music.
Well, yeah, because they got something out of it before, and they're
Yeah.
hoping they can get it again. Like I did a gig in Venice last Thursday with Hugh Schick, the
Yeah.
pianist, and
Yeah.
it was a burning band. It was two tenors. Danny Brown from San Francisco was the other tenor player. Alex Bailey was on drums, and it was fantastic. And somebody came up to me after the show and he said, this was magic tonight. I say, magic? And he goes, yeah. He goes, out of every 50 concerts or so, there's one that's magic. And that's the one you never forget. When something happens, it's never happened before.
Yeah.
It's more than the music, it's magic.
Yeah.
And I saw that when I saw Cecil Taylor at Santa Monica Civic in the 70s. He played with the trio. That was magic.
Yeah.
In other words, what Buell used to call it, and also what Monk used to call it, was you lift the bandstand.
Yeah.
In other words, you actually levitate.
Yeah.
Levitation's a real thing.
Yeah.
It's just that it hardly ever happens.
Yeah. Okay.
So when it happens, it's very rare.
Yeah.
But if you experience it, then you want to get it again. And then you have to sit through a whole bunch of concerts where it doesn't happen. And you might get a little, it's still worth the money, perhaps, hopefully. But, I don't get it. I turned my phone off and I'm still hearing Siri. Oh, it's my computer. Oh, God. Wait a minute.
Well, here's the thing, Marty.
I don't know what to do now.
You don't have to worry about it. It's not bothering me, but if it's bothering you,
Goodbye, Siri. Exit.
There you
Shut
go.
Off.
I want to talk to you about Cecil. Cecil,
I can't hear you now.
Okay, you can hear me now? Now?
Yes.
Okay. I want to talk to you about Cecil Taylor, or as Captain Beefheart called him, Cecil. I talked to Beefheart for 52 times in 1991. He called me once a week. If you don't know this, you got to know this. He went to a Cecil Taylor. No, this was Rossan. Sorry, it's close. Captain Beefheart, Don Van Fleet went and saw Rossan at the lighthouse. And all through the show, they had a talking conversation. Don and Roland were talking through the show. And at the end of the show, Roland goes, Don, where can I get ribs at this hour in LA? And Don goes, the only place you can get ribs at this hour in LA is in the Bible, Roland. But sorry for that divert, but he called him Cecil. So two of my film heroes, their mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor actually says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So is art making, music making more a vehicle or more? Well, is it more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, environments, and cultures are dominant?
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same way about it. It's a vehicle.
Yeah. Can art making or music making be egoless?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the whole point of the only way you can play in public is to get a job, and in order to get a job, you've got to, you know, force your ego on people to hire you. In a
Yeah.
way, not force, but you have to persuade and people to how good you are. Why
Yeah.
should they hire you?
Yeah. That's two lines I'd love to get your reaction to. Al Flipside said, "Don't sell out, sneak in." And Paul Schrader, he wrote Taxi Driver. He said, "The role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail." Which is funny, but it's also a little like, oh, it's the artist going, my art is so pure. I tried to sell out, but I failed. So it must be so pure. It's still pure, you know?
Yeah, but that doesn't apply to Motown
Yeah.
because Motown is pure art and it's
Yeah.
highly successful making hit records. It's both together,
Yeah.
you know,
It's both
right?
together. Yep. You are
Yeah.
right.
And and not only that, when that happens, then the whole culture of the world changes.
Yeah.
When those guys got together, uh, those cats, the musicians that group in Detroit, when they came up with that sound, when they hired those guys, and then Smokey and those cats started writing,
Yeah.
that changed the whole world.
Changed it.
Without
Yeah.
them, there wouldn't be any Beatles.
No, I agree 100% because I was raised in Flint, Michigan, and Ann Arbor, and drenched deep in Motown. In fact, that the Funk Brothers movie was so enlightening when you learned that the guy who just played the tambourine was a jazz drummer, and just he just learned how to specialize jazz drumming to one thing, the tambourine.
Yeah,
And it's
Don Preston was from Detroit.
oh yeah, he's from Flint. He was born in Flint also.
Yeah, he was a bass player and he used to play with Elvin Jones in Detroit as a
Oh
bass
yeah,
player.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I asked him all these questions I'm asking you, but this one I'm curious. This is Leonard Cohen. The only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. How what role does risk playing take, in your performance?
Well, I mean, every time I solo, it's real. I mean, that's my whole approach to soloing. Is you learn the melody and you learn the parts, and then when you blow, you it's up to you. It's a total risk. It's like, when you're playing in the club, if they don't yell at the end of it, then you blew it. So you'll have another chance. You can
Yeah,
fail all the time. It's not like you're going to die. It's not like you're racing NASCAR. You're not going
yeah,
to end up in the hospital because you might not get called back. You might lose the gig.
yeah.
But I mean,
But
I got fired from every gig I ever played. Basically, my whole life's been being fired.
you're
That's the nature of my business. The musicians are the only ones that get fired after every job. Because, they might last 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe if you're doing a Broadway show, you can last maybe a few months. But, as soon as you're hired, it's a finite engagement.
well,
Sometimes
that's
most of it's only 3 hours.
well, that's a good way to lead into Buell because you spent 50 years playing with Buell, basically.
Well, let's see, from 1970 to 1994, it was steady.
Yeah.
After that, he moved out of town, and so it was more sporadic. We still played, we
Yeah.
still collaborated, but yeah, it was a very long running band, 25 years at
25
plus.
years. But it's basically, was it a partnership, or was he hired you?
Oh no, it was a partnership.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? What's the main thing you learned from playing with Buell?
Well, he taught me the authenticity of black music. Like when I met Buell, I was into Pharoah Sanders and late John Coltrane and Albert Ayler. I was into the avant-garde. I was 19 years old when I met him. And I just wanted to play free jazz.
Yeah.
So then he said, "You've got to listen to Duke Ellington, Ben Webster." I never even heard of these guys.
Wow.
I realized Duke Ellington wrote Take the A Train, which I had learned in high school,
Yeah.
But I never really studied it. I studied giant steps,
Yeah.
I learned how to play giant steps. I learned how to play late Coltrane, Pharoah, all that way out stuff. I learned how to play with real high energy, and I learned how to play R&B and funk. But I didn't know how to really play like Ben Webster. I could play like Sonny Rollins a little bit.
Yeah.
But he he studied with when he was 15, he played with the Chicago guys, Eddie Condon, and then Steve Lacy,
Yeah.
So he grew up in Dixieland kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then Walter Page took him under his wing and took him to Sidney Bechet and all those guys.
Yeah.
Vic Dickinson. Buell was like 15 years old. He learned how to play with all those guys. So that was a tradition that I didn't know anything about. So he turned me on to that. And I've been learning it ever since. I mean, I'm still listening to Johnny Hodges and,
Do you favor Coleman Hawkins or Ben Webster more? Is there one you lean towards more?
Well, I'm a more Ben Webster fan. I like Coleman Hawkins. So I listen to him too.
Yeah.
But I'm more of into Ben Webster's style. I get Johnny Hodges. I play the tenor like Johnny Hodges. That's what Ben Webster did.
Yeah.
He says, "I'm just playing Johnny Hodges." Ben Webster learned from Lester Young. He learned how to play the saxophone from Lester Young. Lester was in a family band, and in Kansas City, they kind of adopted Ben. He was playing piano in silent movie houses in Oregon, He wasn't playing saxophone at all, just piano, stride piano. But anyway, so I kind of, and I've had black teachers like Bill Green, and the guy that came to the door and taught me how to count measures and how to have good rhythm as a percussionist. So I mean, in a way, like black music, it doesn't have to be played by black people, but it's still black music.
Yeah.
But to me, Beethoven, in a way, is black music too.
Yeah.
In a way, it's the approach,
Well, what's that guy? Anthony Wilson's dad. Who's the guy who the pioneer of LA jazz?
Gerald.
Gerald Wilson. He said, I read this in Variety once. He said that the Russian composers invented bebop with their something about the fifth.
Oh, the flat five?
The flat five. That's it. The Russians invented bebop. I like that. But let's go into Coleman. Aaron Copland saying the 4 elements of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Now, you've talked about this a little already. You brought up melody and harmony, but the main question is, how do you navigate those 4? What plays the role for you I know it's there, it's a question of navigating, but just break it down. But before you do that, to the normal person on the street, what is tone color? How do you describe? Because most people will know what melody, harmony, and rhythm is, but they might not know this musical term, tone color. What is tone color?
Well, I think counterpoint is the most important.
You mean Copeland's leaving one out? You're
Yeah,
saying a fifth is counterpoint. Okay, now before you go into
I'd say the first is counterpoint.
okay, but before
Without
you go,
counterpoint,
yeah,
there's not much interesting stuff going on.
okay. So now go back. What is tone color? And then describe what is counterpoint to the normal person, not a musical terms. How do you describe it in just layperson's terms?
It's the atmosphere.
That's what tone color is.
Yeah.
Okay, now what? That's good.
In other
Atmosphere.
words, it's the difference between a sunny day and a foggy day,
That's
you
good.
know, or a windy day. It's
Yeah, that's that you did it metaphorically beautiful. Now, what is counterpoint in layperson's terms?
okay. Counterpoint is the story. It's a
The
storyline.
wow.
You know, that's what CPE Bach, well, J.S. Bach started the whole thing. He started it all with counterpoint. Before
Yeah,
J.S. Bach, composers didn't really use counterpoint. You know, they as much. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't use it,
yeah,
but he was the master, and he made the counterpoint generate the harmony,
yeah.
the bass line. That's the foundation of everything. And then
Okay.
CPE was his son, CPE, Carl Philipp Emanuel. He took it another level, and another he turned the music into what Mozart would become.
Yeah,
In fact, Mozart called him the father of us all. Carl Philipp Emanuel. At that time, Carl Philipp Emanuel was the most famous musician in the world, the most famous composer and pianist. He was, the Beatles of the.
you mean he is literally Bach's son?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. See, J.S. Bach was really good friends with Telemann. They were really tight. Telemann was the godfather of some of J.S. Bach's kids. He had, I think, 4 or 5 sons, and he was just a church organist in Leipzig. I mean, he was just a church organist somewhere, and there was a job in Leipzig that Telemann was offered the gig, and he was negotiating with the church for the money, and he got them up into an astronomical sum, that an unheard of fee that no one ever gotten in history. And then he couldn't do the gig because he was working for the Prince of Prussia or somebody, and he couldn't get out. You know, he couldn't. It was royalty. He couldn't say no. It was like if you're a musician, you were kind of not quite a slave, but more like an indentured servant. So, musicians back then, if you took a job in an orchestra, you'd have to move to the city the orchestra's in. You'd have to leave your family at home. You'd have to work, 6 months at a time, and then you get a day off, and you get to go home for a few days and come back. It was like being in the army, kind of.
yeah,
So Telemann said, I can't do this job, and I'm going to recommend you. Make sure you ask for this amount of money. So he did, and they didn't want him. They wanted someone else, but he couldn't do it. So J.S. Bach became the composer in Leipzig of the church, big church there. And that's how he was able to send his kids to music school. Because back then, music school was like USC is now. It was
yeah,
like, 75 grand a year. And he had 4 kids he was putting through school.
yeah.
So he could afford it now. So that's the only reason we have classical music as we know it, was because Telemann went to bat for J.S. Bach. Telemann is a fantastic composer. Telemann is a much more prolific composer than Bach. He wrote, hundreds of concertos. Bach wrote 6 Brandenburg concertos. Telemann wrote hundreds of those.
Wow. But Marty, how do you now? You added a fifth. That's beautiful to Copeland's elements, ingredients of music. How do you navigate that melody, harmony, rhythm, tone, color, and counterpoint? How do you navigate those?
Well, you have to. I basically, like Buell told me, he said, "Why don't you play duets with yourself?"
Oh my.
And I said, "Oh." So I said, "Okay." So I played a lick, and then I played as if I was someone else answering what I just played.
Oh, you literally did call and response with yourself.
Yes. That leads to some great improvisation, because then you kind of blend the two together and they turn into harmony and melody at the same time, which is counterpoint.
I got you.
So counterpoint's a key.
Yeah.
And all great music has it. I mean,
Yeah.
music that everybody loves, or I used to love. I don't know what people listen to now. Although I guess it's the same. I mean, when people hear really great music, they can't deny it. They get excited,
No,
even
they
if they don't
can't.
know what they're hearing.
They
They've never
can't
heard it
deny it.
before.
Yeah. Well, the three tenets, my friend says the three T's of music are taste, technique, and theory. You've learned how to play this stuff, technique. You know the theory. How does one acquire taste?
Well, yeah, that's like my Glenn Johnson was a early pioneer, a clarinet player, and he studied acoustics and went to work for JBL Lansing. You know, who invented the voice of the theater speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, Glenn was born in around 1918,
Yeah.
and he played in Venice at the Baths. You know, every
Did
place
he
used to have an
really?
orchestra. Yeah, the Plunge. You know, there was like an indoor
Yeah.
pool on the beach. He played there. I mean, he played for
Yeah.
Charlie Chaplin before Sound Pictures.
Yeah.
You know, so he had a line that's his line that I'll remember was, "There's a fine line between scratching your ass and tearing it." In other words, you're trying to emote something and you're playing, but then, oh, you went too far and it sucked. You know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's George Clinton said there's a fine line between funk and disco. And it really is. There is a fine line. A lot of discos, all like soul,
yeah, but disco has no taste.
well, the main disco ref that Michael Jackson used soul, whatever that line is. That is fucking disco played in discos and then flipped over. Yeah, anyways, I love
You know what
this.
Van Dyke Parks used to say at that time? He used to say,
What?
"How long can disco on?"
Disco.
Yeah, I
when I
hated disco. I
when
always
I
hated it.
asked, yeah, no, I agree with you. When I asked the Van Dyke Parks all these questions, no, I interviewed him with all these questions years ago. And when I asked him to do it, he says, "I want to see you nail someone else before you nail me." I says, "Dude, I'm not out to nail you. We're just here to have fun." But I love this Glenn Johnson line. There's a fine line between scratching your ass and tearing it. So, Marty, on to this thing of taste. And I'll tell you, I mean, right off the bat, most people go, how do you acquire taste? They go by experience or by listening. Well, that's sort of evident by exposure, but there is something where you gravitated towards Albert Eiler and not David Sanborn, who, I like cringe. I know he played with Ray Charles, but what he did to the sax sound kills me. It ruined, jazz sax.
Well, yeah, that's kind of unfortunate. But David Sanborn used to play with Paul Butterfield,
I know.
and he
No,
was fantastic
it
with
is
Paul
fantastic.
Butterfield.
But
no, I
that's
mean, when I say was, I mean, he was coming from a pure blues perspective.
I,
And, then after that, then he realized that, oh, pop music, I'm gonna go commercial. So something happened where
yeah.
he changed his whole style. I never changed my whole style for anything. I didn't
Well,
want to, I mean, I played pop gigs too, but I never
yeah.
really had much interest. I'm not putting, I mean, I'm not putting him down. I think that's a valid, what
Yeah.
he did was, fine. I mean,
Well, I don't know
Kenny
if it's
G,
fine.
Kenny
It's
G's another one. I mean, Kenny G's another one.
yeah.
They have a sound they want to hear. They're
Yeah.
promoting it. They want to be a success, and they are.
Yeah.
What can you say about it?
But
But for me,
it's Stravinsky. Most people don't know what they like. They like what they know. So all you hear is that sax sound every Saturday Night Live, every Saturday night, and you hear that like I cringe. It's like I asked Richie Morales, who's a great drummer, he just toured with Al Di Meola, all these questions too, just a couple months ago, and he got a good gig. He played with Spyro Gyra, but he had them play. They had the sound mixer turn Jay off in his monitors because he couldn't handle the sax sound anymore.
well, I like Lenny Pickett.
Well,
You
no,
know,
I know what you're saying. I
Lenny
like,
Pickett studied. Lenny Pickett studied with Bert Wilson, who
yeah,
I studied with also a little bit.
yeah,
I didn't really study with him. We were neighbors and we hung
yeah,
out, but I learned a lot from him.
yeah,
But no, Lenny Pickett is a masterful saxophone player, and he can play shit nobody else can
yeah.
play.
And
And
he got a
it's like when you hear Lenny Pickett, that's Lenny Pickett.
yeah,
There's
he
no
got a
doubt.
good gig. Got a good gig. He got paid. Anyways, the taste question leads into this. This is Marshall McLuhan said, song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, I think African music and Native American, at least the Native American music I know, uh, that I've heard and played, and West African music they're very similar, completely different language.
Yeah.
The Kauai dialect of my wife's is her mother is Tona Odom in
Yeah.
Arizona, that huge reservation down there near the border, and her father was Kauai at the Salton Sea. So I know that both the tribes' music, the Kauai bird song, and there's a very big similarity between ancient peoples. I don't think it has much to do with language at all.
What's more fundamental, music or language?
I have to say music.
Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
When it drips, it's ready.
Who's it by?
Buell Neidlinger.
Oh, that is good. It's ready. I can't wait to look that one up. Buell, what? Boy, do we miss him.
He was making fun of Don Ellis. He had a bass. He had a bass line in 15/16 time. It went boom, 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 boom. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I made up the melody on that one. That's on a record.
Yeah. So Thelonious Monk said there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
Oh, yeah. I used to argue with Brenton Banks. And for those of you who don't know Brenton Banks was one of the real historical scholars of American music. He was also born around 1918, I guess. And he was in Nashville playing, he was black, and he grew up in Cleveland, and he was playing the piano. See, in those days, if you were black and you're born in 1918 and you had musical talent, you played more than one instrument. You played piano and violin. That's what the most common musicians. Everybody had a piano in their house, and then violin was popular. So he played piano and violin. He was very good on both. And his first professional gig as a barely out of a teenager was the biggest club in Cleveland. And Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson, all the big bands would come through there, and Brenton would be playing as in the house trio and warm up for Duke Ellington and Count Basie and these guys. So most of the time, I mean, regularly, Count Basie and Duke Ellington wanted a break. So they say, Brenton, fill in for me. I'm taking a few tunes off. Play this tune for me. So Brenton would be playing the Duke Ellington Orchestra at the piano, filling in for a tune or two. And every band he did that with. So he learned a lot. He learned basically the entire history of Black American music or American songbook and whatever. He learned it all by the time he was like 25. And then he was also an accomplished violinist. So he went to school in Nashville, finished his degree, and he was playing the Tchaikovsky violin concerto with a pianist. And after the concert, Chet Atkins came up to him and he said, "Do you read?" And Brenton said, "Of course I read. I just played the Tchaikovsky violin concerto." And he goes, "What are you doing tomorrow at 10 a.m. or Monday? What are you doing Monday at 10 a.m.? He goes, "Nothing much." And he goes, "You're my concert master at RCA." So they recorded Patsy Cline, Elvis Presley, everybody who recorded for RCA that had strings on it, which was like most of the artists. Brenton was playing concertmaster, from 1960, from 50, what was that? 58 to 1970, about 12, 15 years of record dates. While he was still a professor at Tennessee State, his students were Hank Crawford and Andrew White, among others.
Jesus,
this guy was a genius, and I played with him for 15 years.
What's Brenton's last name again?
Banks, Banks. Yeah.
But he
taught me. Yeah, he would tell me things about ancient Egypt and myth and mythology and about during the Depression when the black maid, worked for 30 years and she was getting on in years and she saved $3,000, never spent a penny of her earnings, saved everything under her mattress. And when the Depression hit in Cleveland, she was the only one with $3,000 cash. And she bought a huge mansion, one of the most expensive homes in Cleveland, up on the hill in the White District. She bought the house.
Wow.
Nobody else had any cash. They were all in the market. I learned a lot from Brenton.
About a lot about music.
That's why I'm saying when he always used to say there are no wrong notes. And we were in this group, Thelonious, with Buell, and the melody had a flat 5 in it, and he'd play a regular 5.
Yeah.
I'd get, "Brandon, please, it's a flat 5," and he goes, "There are no wrong notes."
Oh my God, that is great.
"Yeah, but it sounds weird." And he goes, "Well, try getting used to it." We'd argue about it.
When I asked Hadda Brooks, I asked Hadda Brooks that same question. She goes, "There's wrong notes. It's just how good you cover them up."
Yeah. Well, yeah, to me, they're wrong if they're not in the right place. Yeah. You can have the same note, but if it's an octave higher, it'll sound better. That's what bugged me.
Okay, now when you said counterpoint is storytelling, I'm curious. Your reaction to this question, Marty, is great experimental filmmaker Hollis Frampton said, "Narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?"
Well, it's easier when you're young.
Yeah.
You never think about it.
Yeah.
It's only when you're my age that you start saying, well, let's see, it took me 40 years to be able to do this. Now I only have, I don't know, not that long. I don't have another 40.
Yeah.
So you better learn how to do shit quick, a little
Yeah.
faster.
And then, Marty, have you thought about your own history? Who gets your archives? Are you giving it to some college, or what is your plan?
I don't have any archives. I just have a bunch of old recordings I made with my friends. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to throw them out. My kids are into music. My son, Ben, he's a historian. He's got a photographic memory in perfect pitch. He knows, he's my historian.
You're leaving it to your
Yeah,
son.
Ben, he's autistic.
Yeah,
but he's a genius.
that's
So
beautiful.
yeah, if you tell him the day you were born, he'll tell you the day of the week it was.
Wow.
He has a perpetual calendar, and he remembered everything that he ever did in his life. If you give him a date, if you tell him, what did you do on this day? He'll say, oh, well, I was still in elementary school, and he'll tell you the classes he had and the teachers and who the bus driver was and what day he went home that day when he was 6. He remembers everything. He remembered everything I've ever done when he was around, and even that he knows about. He can't forget if he tried.
Wow. Can you
I'm gonna leave it to him?
Good. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever?
Yes.
What is it?
Well, the earliest. No, I don't know about the early.
Or one of the earliest.
Okay. Well, the earliest basically was when I could walk, but I was still crawling around, and my father would be playing Liszt or Scriabin sometimes Chopin and Debussy on the piano, but I like the thunderous, loud stuff. And I'd be crawling around in circles under the piano real fast, like a cat chasing his tail. And I was very excited by the music. I was right underneath the piano, a grand piano. That's what I remember, one of my earliest. But I remember when I was 4 that I had I don't know what you call it, some insight or something. I realized that adults were all miserable. And because kids were normal.
Yeah.
Kids were totally open, receptive, and into new ideas and, fantasy worlds, and the sky's the limit, for creativity. And adults were completely the opposite. They were completely fucked up. They were miserable. They'd come home. They were tired all the time. They just sat around and read or listened to music, and they had no life. They were half dead,
Yeah.
These are people in their 30s. But to me, they were ancient, I was 4. And I said, I'm not going to be an adult. When I grow up and I'm big, I'm still going to be like I am now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be like those people.
That's smart. Now, when you said this thing about crawling in circles, it reminded me of Thelonious Monk, epistrophe, where he'd walk in circles or, he'd turn around.
Well,
and my friend, I'm curious, my friend said a great line once. He said, Thelonious Monk heard all the notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them.
Yeah, but he used to play them all.
Yeah, he used to play them all, but then leads to the question, like Miles talks about the space between notes. How did you learn to navigate or just a sense of dynamics when not to play and utilize silence?
Well, I was always working on a little bit, but when I played, I was hired by Peter Serkin to play this Webern, Opus 22. For saxophone, violin, clarinet, and piano, and go on the road playing it and record it in New York in 1977. And Webern's music is all space. It has more rests than it has notes.
Yeah.
So, da, 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 bop, bop, da, do, do, boop, boo, ba, da, and it gets real fast and intricate, but that's where I really started getting into the rhythm you get, the forceful rhythm. Like, I don't know if you ever heard Peter Serkin play, but he has this rhythm that, like Monk in a way, it's intense rhythm.
Yeah.
Intense. It's burning. It's swinging like a drummer. It's propulsive, and most of it happens with not with the notes, but with the rests.
Yeah.
The rests are so important. So that's when I realized how important they were. And Buell was encouraging me too. He says, "Why don't you should play more like Webern? And one of the problems I had, and a lot of musicians have this problem, in order to keep the time and to keep track of where you are, you keep playing. Coltrane did that too. Coltrane had the same problem.
Right.
But the thing with Coltrane was he did it so well and kept changing it and coming up with new notes and new things that it was great when he did it. But everybody else that did it, it was just kind of boring. So you end up repeating yourself,
Yeah. It's somewhat connected here, Marty. I thank you for telling me that. As Pauline Oliveros worked with sound above the audio and below, creating a mass. So it was said, not that it created a mass, it created something audible. It produced a sum indifference tone, which happened to be located within the audible frequency range. By combining something so high you couldn't hear it and something so low you couldn't hear it, it yields something in the middle that you could hear. Whether that something in the middle you hear is it's the concept. Whether or not you like that something in the middle is another question. It's the concept. Do you know this concept of sum indifference tone?
Well, no, but it's basic, frequency response and harmonics. So the fundamental string, when it's divided, it goes up an octave, fifth, like tuning a piano.
Right.
So that's what I'm into when I'm generating tone on a woodwind, is I'm trying to get all those harmonics in the sound. And if they're there, then I'm happy. If they're not there, then, forget that reed, put that reed away, get another one. Or do something to bring back the harmonics,
It's your tool. Like Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
That reminds me of my Chinese doctor. I used to have physical troubles. When I was working a lot, I have TMJ, which is just a muscle spasm of your jaw.
Yeah.
And you have to go to a Chinese doctor with needles. This guy, James, Dr. Wing Shea, he'd put a needle in my jaw, but first he'd rub it, with acupressure, very strong fingers for 20 minutes, rubbing, pressing until it hurt. And then he'd put the needle in.
Right.
And I had trouble with my arm and whatever troubles, it wasn't that bad. I didn't have that many problems, but when I did, he was the only doctor I went to that could fix it. No other medical doctor could help. They do ultrasound and this quackery. Didn't help. You might as well not even go. So, But yeah, that's an example of the chi through the body.
Yeah.
When something is tight, you got to loosen it. But I don't know how. Oh, I can't think of a weakness. Uh, I mean, my weaknesses are my weaknesses. I don't think that I can ever convert them into strengths. You know, I mean, remember what Thelonious Monk said was that everybody has a better sense of time certain days than other days. In other
Yeah.
words, you're weak some days and you're stronger other days. So the way to convert the weakness into strength is find the person you're playing with that's strong
Yeah.
and go with him,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate for musicians because there's usually a conductor and a composer and they're in charge and you're at their mercy.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Compromise.
Dude, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. You've accomplished a lot, Marty. How do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
I have no way of knowing.
Oh, that's
Really,
good.
there's no way to know. I mean, how would you tell? I mean, there's no way to tell. It's all equal. I mean, none of it is any good without the three elements: skill, luck, and ambition. You said,
Yeah. Yeah.
actually, ambition is not necessary.
Yeah.
Ambition, well, it is, but ambition is the more dangerous one.
Yeah.
Like the only time I really got into trouble in the music business was when I really tried to get a gig. Then it backfires because when you really try to get a gig, you're putting someone out of work.
Yeah.
See? So
it backfired.
yeah, I had a lot of hairy moments in the music business, and they usually were the result of being ambitious. When I just kept my head down and went with the flow, everything was okay.
It's funny. Here's how I used to ask the question. Is ambition based more on fear or joy? And actually, 80% of people would say fear. And then I read William Friedkin, the Exorcist director. He said, in Hollywood, skill and luck have nothing to do with it. It's all ambition. So then I made up the question, luck, skill, and or ambition. And one friend goes, none of those. It's necessity. So the whole point of this series is it's like me and you versus the wording on the question. We're just trying to suss out, like this next one. Is perception reality?
Well, it can be. What happened to me was, the way it worked out for me was that I didn't really want to be a musician, but I just kind of fell into it. I got lucky and I learned how to do it. Yeah. But then, even after I learned how to do it, I didn't really want to be a musician. I mean, I didn't care if I worked or not. I was happy just smoking weed, teaching some students. I taught students when I was 17. I dropped out of, I didn't drop, I graduated high school. I left my parents' house when I was 17, and I lived with some musicians and in Venice. And, you could do that for $30 a month, rent a room, And I was teaching music when I was 17 at Roscoe Music store in Culver City. And I told them I was 19 and they hired me because I could already play flute, clarinet, and saxophone. And I could teach the kids, junior high school kids. So I was making some good money. I was studying with Bill Green. He kind of taught me how to teach. So I liked teaching.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really trying to get any work or anything, although I was playing R&B at night and, but I never tried to get the gig. I was just someone just said, hey, do you want to do this gig? I said, okay. But when I was studying with Bill Green and I saw what a genius, what a talented work ethic the guy had, he practiced all the time. He could play the piccolo while riding a unicycle backwards in circles.
Yeah.
He'd play a long tone on the piccolo while riding a unicycle backwards
Yeah.
in circles and hold the note out perfectly steady. You
Wow.
know, I have trouble holding a piccolo note, not just standing there sitting. He also had a black belt in karate. And so he was an inspiration. I said, well, this guy can do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you can, if he can play the flute, maybe you can play the flute and good enough to be a studio musician. And now this is just a rumor I heard. I didn't really know any studio musicians, but I said, oh yeah, the big money's in the studios, like Bill Green. Later I'd meet these guys, not too much later, but I said, so if in order to do that, you got to be able to sight read anything. So I started sight reading everything. My father had tons of sheet music, piano music, Liszt, Bach, Debussy, everything. I'd start reading that on the clarinet. Then I'd learn how to transpose. I'd take it up a step. I'd be in the opera orchestra playing clarinet after the percussion thing. I started working in the community opera, and I couldn't afford an A clarinet, so I played the clarinet and A parts on the B flat clarinet. I just read it down a half step.
Yeah.
I'd just put in the key signature, add the flats, and read it down in a line. So I was doing all this stuff. I was getting really good at it. I say, someday I'm going to be a studio musician and I'm going to be able to play everything. But little did I know that none of that stuff was required to be a studio musician.
Yeah.
You don't have to do any of that shit. You barely had to play at all. Most of the studio musicians weren't. I mean, the doublers were really good, but
Yeah.
the legit players were good, but a lot of them weren't. A
Yeah.
lot of them were just there because their friends were the leader.
Right.
I didn't know any of this stuff, but it didn't stop me. But anyway, that was the way I generated my ambition.
Yeah.
It wasn't to do a specific job. It was just to have enough skill to be able to compete with the best players. And I wanted to sound better than everybody. So I practiced my ass off on flute, clarinet, saxophone. Later oboe. I studied oboe for 7 years with Alan Vogel, and I was good on the oboe. I was a good oboist. But by that time, as usual in my career, by the time I really got good at something, it was no longer necessary in the business.
Yeah.
I was obsolete, see?
Yeah.
But
well,
it's
Marty, I asked for 90 minutes. Can you go a little longer?
Sure.
Good. Because I was really curious in one of your interviews online, you mentioned One-Eyed Jack's soundtrack by Hugo Friedhofer.
Oh yeah, Friedhofer.
Oh, Friedhofer.
Yeah.
Now, my friend is in One-Eyed Jack's. His name's Timothy Carey. He's a great character actor. He was in Kubrick films and Cassavetes. And, that film has a lot of history with Brando. It's the only film Brando directed because the director.
Yeah, that was one of my father's favorite films.
Yeah.
He said, you have to see this movie. I never saw it. He says, if you get a chance, you got to see this picture.
But then I looked into Friedhofer. The guy was an amazing. He studied with he worked with Max Steiner.
Right, he was the orchestrator
for Max Steiner, and I had the guy who just wrote an amazing book on the music by Max Steiner. Stephen C. Smith's book is amazing. He's a real Steiner scholar, and I looked up Friedhofer, and he has this line, and I'm curious your reaction to it, just in a general sense. Hugo said, "I'm just a fake giant among real pygmies." What does that mean to you? And what do you think he means by that?
Well, I don't have no idea. But those guys went beyond the pale,
Yeah.
Those guys were like, they never slept. They worked. It's amazing they lived as long as they did. I mean, my friend teacher John Neufeld was an orchestrator. He knew Friedhofer. He worked for Friedhofer as a clarinetist.
Yeah.
And he scored John Williams pictures. I mean, he orchestrated John Williams for like the last, God, I don't know, for 15 years, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and he stood up, you know, he didn't sit down, he stood up at a podium and wrote with a pencil.
Yeah.
You know, everybody, by then everybody was using computers, but, you know, finally, you know, I'd say, hey, how long are you going to do this until you can't write anymore, until your hand and gets numb with arthritis, or, you know, finally he quit, you know, but, you know, it was bad for him because John Williams wrote so many notes, you know, they all had to be written out and orchestrated.
Yeah.
You know, he wrote twice as many notes as Steiner sometimes, you know.
Yeah, there's that big thing about notes. It seems as though, you know, it's been such an increase with the velocity and number of notes. I don't know if you've seen this woman play keyboard. Just go on YouTube and put in Domi, Domi. She's a Berkeley French 20-year-old keyboardist, and she plays the Flintstones theme song in 1 minute. And she runs through the history. She's playing Art Tatum, then Joe Zawinul, and then, you know, Stevie Wonder. And it's not just bullshit show offy. It is really amazing. But the notes are so fast that sometimes it's like slow down. But then, you know, and let the music breathe. But there are people who did that, like Art Tatum, who in Charlie Parker, they played a lot of notes. So, I mean, you know, you can just talk.
Yeah, but they played a lot of notes, but not like, they didn't play too many notes.
Right. A lot is different than too many. I see.
Yeah. I mean, Art Tatum, he did play a lot of notes, but he had a shape to it.
Yeah.
You know, it was very musical. And Charlie Parker especially.
Yeah.
You know. And it wasn't that Bird, it wasn't his pyrotechnics. Bird's genius was the way he would stick a melody into the structure completely off the wall, like it had nothing to do with any measure or beat or anything. It's pure genius. No one else could do it, and they'll never do it. They never could do it, and they'll never do it like that again. He was the only one that could do that. Get a musical idea and just out of the air superimpose it on something else that was going on.
It's really amazing how you told me that. That's important, Marty. I appreciate that, because the next question I'm going to ask you was told to me by my friend who was an altacocker on the Venice Boardwalk, Al Lewis. And he used to hang out with Charlie Parker and Billie Holiday in New York, you know, many, many years ago. And he argued with Charlie Parker one night, and Mingus, he hung out with Mingus, and he said, oh, you know, Charlie quotes Stravinsky. And he goes, oh yeah, no, it's at the beginning of the song. And he says, no, it's at the end of the song. And so they went to you know, his apartment, and they put the needle down on the record, and Charlie, he quotes it at the beginning and the end. It was both places, you know. So Al taught me this.
Well, Stravinsky used to come in the club and hear those guys.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
In fact, that's how we met Buell. Stravinsky met Buell that way. He went to a Cecil Taylor gig at the 5 Spot.
Did he?
And then he hired Buell to play the Stravinsky, what was it called, at the Lincoln Center in 1966? The festival, the Stravinsky Festival.
Yeah.
And before that, he hired him to go to Venice, Italy with a pickup group to play for the bishop. I can't remember the piece. It was around 1958 or 59, I think. I don't remember. It was a chamber music, and they played it at the, you know, the St. Mark's Cathedral in Venice. Yeah.
Well,
and they do the rehearsal, and they get through the piece. The bishop comes over and speaks to Mrs. Stravinsky, the wife, Stravinsky's wife, Vera, I think her name was, she came up and whispered in Igor's ear, and Igor said, "Put a repeat sign at the end, da capo," because he'd gotten paid to write 40 minutes of music and it was a 20-minute piece. Or maybe it was 10 and 20, whatever. It was
Right.
only half the amount of minutes. So he put the repeat sign in and everybody was happy.
There you go. Let's turn a weakness into a strength right there. I didn't read the fine. It's like Tom Waits says, the big print giveth and the small print taketh away. But here's the question Al taught me, and I ask you. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Wake up.
I'm glad you're laughing, dude. And Marty, what'd you learn from your deep delve into Herbie Nichols? What you taught me about Bird is he knew how to put melody into structures. And you couldn't figure out where he got this. What did Herbie Nichols do that's so unique that you were attracted to studying him?
Well, Buell would bring some charts in to play. He'd write out like 2300 Skidoo, and I just dug the music a lot. And then he said, "Listen to these recordings," and we recorded them with violin, viola, trumpet, cello, and tenor, no drums. And I just I said I got kind of addicted to playing his music because, from my background, I'm like I like playing Stravinsky on the clarinet, the three pieces.
Yeah.
And my compositions were kind of based on Stravinsky. I used him as a jumping off point.
Yeah.
And Herbie was really into Bartok. In fact, Bartok's wife let him stay at her house. Herbie was homeless half of his life. And Herbie really dug Bartok and Stravinsky, and Buell would have records and they'd listen in his loft, Buell's loft, when Herbie would come over, which was all the time.
Yeah.
Right around the corner from the 5 spot. So, Herbie would write, was influenced by these, and I just like playing his music. It was very difficult and it was hard to learn the structures, and that's what kind of turned me on. Was it wasn't 8-bar phrases. It was a 5-bar phrase or a 10-bar phrase or 6-bar phrase. So that intrigued me.
Yeah.
I said it kind of, I thought it was very hip. Well, nobody else thought it was hip, but I didn't care. I wanted to play it anyway. I had found musicians who liked to play it.
Yeah.
So, it's a very eclectic taste.
Marty, how do you find peace of mind?
I don't find peace of mind. When I practice, I forget about things.
Yeah.
But after I stop practicing, it's back in the same bullshit, It's mostly maintenance and repair. That's what I have to deal with. But I guess everybody does to some form or another.
Yeah.
It's either your instruments, your house, something breaks down.
Yeah.
Something's always breaking down, and you either have to fix it yourself or hire someone to fix it or figure it out. And if you don't figure it out, you're doomed. If you let it slide, you're dead. You can't let the shit pile up. You got to deal with it. You can postpone it for a couple of weeks, maybe.
Yeah.
If it's your car, and you need new tires, you're either going to get new tires or you're going to die.
Yeah.
So the spirit, if it's your house, you're not going to die from it, but your spirit is going to be affected.
Yep. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Oh, God. My Miraculous Musical Life.
Oh, that's good. They want to scent the glue in the binding of your book. What smell?
Pardon me?
They want to scent the glue in the
Oh,
binding of your autobiography. What smell?
probably mint.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
I already had a statue built of me. Doesn't apply.
All
I had a
right.
statue made out of a girlfriend back in the early 70s made a statue of me out of chicken wire and what's that paper stuff? Paper mache.
Yeah.
And it was me with horns, a tail. I was a satyr with hooves.
Oh, yeah.
And I was playing a weird serpent horn.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Mm-hmm.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I don't. I
Yeah.
don't see it. Oh, well, no, the cultural, I don't see anything going on like that. I
Yeah.
just see a retro regression. To me, it's regression. It's
Yeah.
not a cultural advancement at all. However, I'm inspired by lots of young musicians who can really play. I
Yeah.
mean, they can really play.
Yeah.
Uh, all instruments, all kinds of different people from all walks of life. They're inspired. They practice. They work hard. They sound really great on their instruments.
It's
So, but
good.
they're playing music that we all know. They're not playing, coming up with something new.
Yeah.
They're playing bebop or they're playing the blues or
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. That's
It's
called.
not like black music kind of it hit a wall.
Yep.
It started in the turn of the century in America, and it went through like you know Two Beat, Sidney Bechet, Louis Armstrong, Vic Dickinson, those Sidney Catlett, and all that, and when Buell was a teenager, and then it went to like Cecil Taylor and Coltrane and Pharoah Sanders, then it went Ornette Coleman, and then it hit a wall in
Yep.
the 70s. And then it just kind of stopped. It just, guys that didn't really know how to practice or play their horns took over, and they had free jazz. It was based on nothing. And it just kind of died
Yep.
because people weren't making music they could teach other musicians. Like
Yep.
Ornette would write tunes and he'd teach the tunes to his guys and they'd learn the tunes. It's all in songwriting. And then even Sonny Rollins said he doesn't play standards anymore. This is when he was playing, about 10 years ago. He said, when I work now, I just play original material because nobody knows the standards I used to play.
Yeah.
The Great American Songbook, that's over,
Yeah.
But so now you go into jazz clubs, they're still playing the Great American Songbook.
Yeah.
While people are talking. Although, when you play music of Mingus or Monk, the great composers, Ellington, certain pieces, people, they don't talk. They
Right.
just pay attention.
Yeah.
I noticed that. If you play music of Sun Ra, Herbie Nichols, I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever played music of Herbie Nichols where they stop talking. Monk, they even talk, but if it's presented right, they don't. Certain audiences, they really pay attention. So their music is still living.
Yeah.
That music is alive.
No, I saw.
So why play new stuff?
Yeah, I saw Sun Ra many times. We didn't talk when he was playing. we were in another, dimension.
Right.
But what you talked about, Marty, is anxiety of influence by Harold Bloom. You absorb your influence, then you abandon them. So you don't become retro, you're just rooted. you're rooted in it, and then you're inventing something new. It's alchemy. You take two known things, put them together, and come up with a third unknown thing.
Right.
So it goes along with that duality, or this two-ness, otherness. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I just want to try to get musicians some money.
Yeah.
They deserve it. Right now, I just try to get work so I can, get some money for the young musicians.
Yeah.
Like, and play the music I want to play.
Yeah.
And I can only play the music I want to play because they know it.
Yeah.
They can play it.
Yeah.
So that's what it's about. I mean, I also like to just play with musicians, to create.
Yeah.
Because without them, you can't really create. You can just prepare.
Yeah.
I prepare. My whole life is preparation. Then once in a while, I get to work.
Yeah.
Usually it comes all at once, a whole bunch of jobs within a few days. And then there's weeks of desert.
Yeah.
Months sometimes. Typical.
Yeah. It's funny what you said. Also, I forgot to add the whole thing about you're inspired by young players. And, somebody like John Zorn, he did this big tribute to Ornette in New York before Ornette died. So they're all up there playing the Ornette parts right. And they asked Ornette, do you want to join in? And he says, okay. And he sat off to the side and just blew over them. He didn't blow the shit he wrote. He wanted to take it, but he didn't want to just be a fucking retro, here's a, greatest hits of Ornette played by these guys. And I thought that was proof of how important Ornette is to me and to many people. He had that ability to have courage and take risk.
Yeah, I worked with Charlie Hayden's Liberation Orchestra for a couple of years, the West Coast version. And Charlie would say to me, how come nobody plays Ornette Coleman tunes?
Yeah.
He couldn't understand it. And I'd say, gee, I don't know, I said, I know Ramblin', I play Ramblin' sometimes, and Bird Food I like to play, but the reason no one plays it is because they don't want to, they're not equipped.
Yeah.
They can play the melody, but they haven't figured out how to really play. Like you have to play like Ornette, and Don Cherry and Charlie Hayden.
That's it.
Or, Buell Neidlinger could play like that too. He could do it.
There
are players that can do it, but most of them, they don't want to invest. It's like the reason that is the same, like if you have musicians like Sidney Bechet and Vic Dickens, well, not him, Louis Armstrong, for example, and you have all these musicians, thousands of them that play that swing music in the late 20s, 30s, and then Charlie Parker comes along and plays Cherokee.
Yeah.
The musicians can't play that. They can't take a solo after Charlie Parker. So they put him down. They say, oh, that's bullshit. That's not real music. Because they already spent half their careers learning how to play what they know. Yeah. Now they have to learn this new thing. They have to learn how to play substitute chords and, flat fifth harmonies and this new way of playing. They're too old. They're too stuck in their ways, too conservative. And that's the same thing with Ornette. They were beboppers. They finally learned how to play bebop and learn that whole language. And then they got to play like Ornette Coleman. Nobody could play like Ornette Coleman, but Ornette Coleman. And
that's
of course, Dewey Redman could do it. Few guys.
Yeah.
Don Cherry,
Yep.
Bobby Bradford could do it.
Yep.
But
Yeah. Bobby, the great line Bobby, I heard him say is Ornette got 60 grand to play like at Disney Hall. And Bobby said, dude, he's in his band. He says, lower your rates. We could get more gigs. But this is funny, Marty. I interviewed Paul Thompson, has this amazing podcast tutorials on bass on YouTube, and he played in the Charlie Hayden Orchestra like once in Pittsburgh. When Charlie would just go around and play the music with the players he could get who could play it. And I asked him this question because I had a chance to talk to Charlie once. And I said, in the middle of an Ornette Coleman song, you play an old Appalachian song. What's the name of that song? And he goes, that's Old Joe Clark. And, boom, 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 boom. And I goes, who wrote it? And Charlie goes, nobody wrote it. Which was a great history of music because somebody wrote it, but it's like Waters of March in Brazil. It's just one of these songs that gets passed on generation after generation. And then who claims the publishing is whoever copyrights in an arrangement of it. So they sort of claim the writing or publishing, on it, when it's hard to say, who wrote some of these songs,
Right. Well, Brahms invented that.
Did he?
Beethoven started it.
Yeah.
Beethoven was the first composer to get publishing. Simrock was the publishing company.
Yeah.
And, Beethoven was able to, or was it Brahms? Brahms took it to a new level.
Yeah.
By renting the music, which is what they still do today.
Yeah.
If you write a piece of music and you're a symphony orchestra and you want to play the piece, you have to rent the parts.
Yeah.
Pay cash.
Yeah.
And that's how Brahms became very wealthy.
Yeah.
But he was the first one to do that. We owe it to him.
Well, I owe a lot.
Now it's just the opposite. Now you can't make any money from owning anything.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably fair and square because most of the stuff is not worth making any money out of. I mean, most of what you hear, why should anybody make money on it? What's so great about it to make, it's not like, it's like not like an Earth, Wind and Fire song or Stevie Wonder, but even the rap artists, I guess, if you sell enough streams, you can make 100 grand and up. But, now like I can put half my catalog on the streaming platforms and make $10 a month, maybe,
Yeah.
Or I can sell a CD and make $10 of one album.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going to happen, but when I started out in the record business, I used to be able to sell 1,500 LPs on a weekend.
Nice.
I used to have distributors, record stores would get them. I get free airplay. NPR had 300 jazz stations on NPR all over the country. They were so hard up for material that I didn't even have to call them up. I didn't have to hire a publicist. I just mail an LP to the station saying, attention, jazz department or jazz DJ or whatever. And they play the record. What else are they going to play? There was only, 3 or 4 releases a month of jazz, especially avant-garde jazz, even less.
Yeah.
Well, now there's probably 1,200 releases a day.
Yeah.
So why should they make money from it? It's hopeless. I don't see any solution to being able to be a musician and make any money.
Yeah.
You can't even go on the road and make money. I guess there's exceptions, but what I did just, I was just lucky. It was a miracle because, I mean, it was only going on for 50 years or something. This industry is only 50 years. That's it.
Yeah.
It's like saying, oh, the car industry, well, that started in 1900 and now it's 2023. So it's 123 years old and it still exists. People still have to buy cars.
Yeah.
But not music.
Well, that's funny because they asked Nancy Sinatra, when did the mob enter the music business? And she said, honey, we invented the music business. So I got two more, Marty, and we're watching Bird. Great writer. A lot of people didn't know he was a musician too. He said, we must now ask some very different questions about the relationship between music and life. What question remains unresolved for you about how music has shaped your behavior?
Well, I guess it helped me solve problems. Not musical problems, other kind of problems.
Yeah.
Life is just a series of problems.
Yeah.
That have to be solved. And either you can or you can't solve them all. You can, the ones you can solve, then you have little victories and you progress, like, working on a musical problem is similar to figuring out, why is there water damage here? First you have to fix the water damage, but you have to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah.
So that's the thing.
Pretty good. Thank you, Marty. What gives you the most optimism?
I don't know. I've just been doing the same thing since I was like 12 years old.
Yeah.
I don't really, I'm just a weird, I'm just kind of a loner that just practices all the time, gives me optimism. Well, I've been lucky so far.
Yeah.
So, maybe my luck will run out. Everybody's luck runs out, I guess. But, I never give up. So that's what Monk used to say. He said, you only fail if you quit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had a rough pandemic, I mean, actually the pandemic I had great luck even during the pandemic, but it was hard on so many of my friends. They're dead now,
Yeah.
Not that the pandemic killed them, but they were just old anyway,
Yep.
Sooner or later they were goners.
Yeah.
Like all of us. But
well,
I don't know. Optimism is just something I've always had. I don't think anything really gives it to me.
Yeah.
I don't ever really quit. I just accept a lull. My whole life has had a lot of lulls. You just have to get used to them.
Yep.
If you're gonna do what I do, which is just play music,
yep,
then you have to either support yourself some kind of way. But I was able to do that because I was always working. I mean, not always. Sometimes I only work once every few months, but it was union work, it created a pension. I had other forms of income. I was always trying to get new streams of income going. So, but to do that in music now is very difficult, but you can still do it a lot of other ways.
Yeah.
People are figuring out how to make money all kinds of different ways, and they still have time to play. So that's optimistic.
That's good. And Marty, I'll be optimistic. The next time you play in Venice, where I live, give me an email or a call. I'd love to see you, man. I've missed these gigs and I want to see you play live.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely. I'm sorry you weren't on the list.
Keep me posted.
I
And
will, Jerry.
you brought up the word miracle, so I wanted to tell you a joke and then close out. The priest, this is a Marshall McLuhan joke he loved. The priest is crossing the Canadian border and he has a flask, and the custom officer says, "Excuse me, Father, what's in that flask?" And he says, "Water." And the custom officer takes a swig and he goes, that's whiskey. And he goes, "It's a miracle." And so, you know, McLuhan said communication of the new is impossible, is a miracle, but it's not impossible. And you proved it. I really learned a lot of newness here, Marty. I appreciate your time, because the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he says, other people. So it's sure been fun spending this time with another person, especially you, Marty. What a blast. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. A lot of fun.
Thank you so much, Marty.
Always.
All right.